At a seminar on social learning on a massive scale, the keynote speaker, Professor Mike Sharples, Chair and Professor in Educational Technology at the Institute of Educational Technology at the Open University of the UK, spoke about FutureLearn and why it has been effective and more successful than other MOOC platforms. Professor Sharples describes the social learning pedagogy built into the FutureLearn platform and shows how this pedagogy-informed design can produce effective learning on a massive scale.
I'm going to be talking about MOOCs. Now, I just want you to imagine if your Vice-Chancellor or your Rector came to you one day and said, "You're an expert in educational technology. How would you like to design a new MOOC platform for millions of people? And I want you to do it in a really innovative way, based on the best knowledge of how people teach and learn." So that's what happened to me in 2012. The Vice-Chancellor of the Open University came to me and said, the Open University is setting up a new MOOC platform to try and compete with Coursera and edX, which were the big or the growing MOOC platforms at that time. Came to me and said, we're going to set up a new one based at the Open University, but international, for millions of people, hundreds of courses, and we're going to design it from the beginning. We're going to design it from scratch. How do you design a new MOOC platform? So that's what my talk is going to be about. It's clear at the moment that more than ever, we need open global education with people from many cultures learning together through cooperation, curiosity, and creativity. Now is exactly the time in a world where it seems to be more and more disconnected. We need to bring people together. So that's a little bit of background to FutureLearn. FutureLearn is a company. So it's a company that's wholly owned by the Open University. And the idea came in 2012, but it was formed as a company in 2013. There are now 6 million registered learners on the FutureLearn platform. And the aim is to transform education for a changing world. And the URL for FutureLearn is www.futurelearn.com. Just a few statistics about the platform at the moment. It's now grown into a global, diverse audience. When we started, most of the learners were from the UK. That's now changed. 75% are international, 25% of the UK. Quite a broad range of demographics, from particularly around the 26 to 45, but also 46 to 65-year-olds. And we're particularly pleased to say that 60% of the learners on the platform are female, which is quite different to some of the other MOOC platforms. And the network, this is slightly old, is near 130 partners from around the world. Leading universities, but also other sorts of educational establishments and institutions, such as the European Space Agency, the British Library, the British Museum, are partners on FutureLearn. And 400 free online courses. And FutureLearn has been a journey. The platform and the rationale for FutureLearn has been a journey, starting with MOOCs in 2012, 2013, the idea of offering massive scale free courses available for anybody to study. And almost as soon as MOOCs came into prominence, as soon as they gained publicity, there were also negative publicity. MOOCs haven't lived up to the hopes and the hype, Stanford participants said. In part because of student dropout from MOOCs, and I can talk about that later, but also the idea of, is there a sustainable business model? Is there a way of keeping MOOCs going? And it's been a journey from MOOCs into degree courses, and now we're offering on FutureLearn platform the first master's level degree courses from Deakin University in Australia and Coventry University in the UK. And that's just the start of offering both master's level courses and also continuing professional development. So it's been a journey. The free aspect hasn't gone away. Almost all of the courses on FutureLearn are still free, but there are also now a variety of accredited courses as well. So there are what we call programs, which are series of courses linked together with the ability to take certificates as you go through, and then an exam at the end, and also degree courses. Online master's degrees in areas such as cybersecurity. So that's where FutureLearn is now. But let's go back to the beginning. In 2013, when I was asked by our Vice-Chancellor to put together a team of people from the Open University to work with a small team of about 10 people initially on this startup company called FutureLearn, one of the first decisions we made was to design a new software platform. Now, that wasn't obvious, because when we first started up, most of the people at the Open University expected that we would use the Open University's platform. After all, we are, at the Open University, the largest users of the Moodle platform. And so the expectation of our IT department was we would just expand our Moodle platform for doing FutureLearn courses. We already had open material. We have also an operation called OpenLearn at the Open University. And now there is some competition between OpenLearn and FutureLearn. So again, the expectation was we would just expand our OpenLearn platform, which runs on Moodle, to offer the FutureLearn courses. The reason we didn't was twofold. One was scale. As I said, we are the largest user of Moodle worldwide at the Open University, and we wanted to scale it up to another level. Instead of to tens of thousands of students, to hundreds of thousands and millions. And the Moodle servers that we had just couldn't cope. We had to have a cloud-based platform. But secondly was pedagogy. So Moodle, like many of the virtual learning environments, was designed in the 1990s to essentially to offer the sort of campus experience of lectures and of written material to make that available online. We wanted to explore whether there was a different sort of pedagogy that would be more appropriate to massive scale learning. And also we wanted to make that available worldwide, and from the beginning to make it accessible on mobile devices. So we wanted to design mobile first. So those were the reasons we decided to build a new platform. So how do you design technology for learning at massive scale? And how do you teach an online class for thousands of students? That was the challenge that we were set right at the start. Now, at the same time, at the Open University, starting in 2012, we were developing a series of reports called Innovating Pedagogy. And by pedagogy, I mean the theory and practice of teaching, learning, and assessment. So we were surveying what were the current approaches to teaching and learning worldwide that could be used as a basis for designing a new platform for learning. And here are some of the different pedagogies that are needed if you want to design a platform for learning. Firstly, visible learning and goal setting. So the work of John Hattie and others, his book Visible Learning, which if you haven't read it, I really do recommend you look at it. John Hattie's book is a massive tour de force. He took a meta-study of meta-studies. So he took meta-studies from around the world of what makes for effective learning, and then compiled all of those meta-studies together to say, of all the things we know, what makes for the most successful learning? And it's no surprise that his book is entitled Visible Learning, because what he suggested that among all of the other means of effective learning, making the learner's journey, the learner's goals and the learner's progress visible to the teacher, and making the teacher's intentions visible to the learner is the most effective way of enabling successful learning. So that was the first thing, making the learning journey, making the learning path visible to the learner, and making the learning progress of each learner visible to the teacher. Secondly, reputation and reward. So making sure that each learner has the ability to set their own goals and to be rewarded for their progress towards achieving those goals. Thirdly, collaborative learning. So we have 30 years of evidence that collaborative learning works. You learn more effectively when you learn together. It's the biggest success story of education for the last 30 years. Fourthly, review and feedback. That if you can provide people with timely feedback on their progress, then that is an effective way of enabling them to reflect on how they're doing and knowing what they need to do better. And formative assessment and mastery learning, so providing that feedback in a way that helps the learner. And lastly, narrative learning and storytelling. Many of the people who were the initial team at FutureLearn came from the BBC. So the CEO of FutureLearn, Simon Nelson, was previously at the BBC, and some of the earliest software developers in the company came from the BBC. Now, the BBC, as you know, has got, they're the great international storytellers. They create TV programs, news programs. They know how to tell a good story. And so they brought that aspect of narrative, of scheduling, of catch-up, of storytelling onto the platform. So those were the elements of pedagogy-led design. But then you have to rethink all these for massive scale. For a wide variety of learners who come from different backgrounds, different cultures, different abilities, and also self-motivation. So although all of the courses had facilitators, you don't have the close tutorial that you do either with classroom teaching or with the sort of online supported learning that we have at the Open University. You don't have that tutorial support. So learners have to be more self-motivated, and also multiple devices and multiple locations. So how do you do that? Well, one way to start is to say that some educational methods get worse as you try to scale them up. Think about sports coaching, for example. If you're teaching somebody tennis or golf, then you might be able to do that to 2 or 3 people. 10, it gets difficult. 100, even more difficult. It doesn't scale. Some educational methods are pretty much the same, however many people you teach to. So what I'm doing now, lecturing to about, 150 of you. It's being video recorded. People who watch online get pretty much the same experience. In fact, they might get a better experience because they can pause, go away and have a cup of tea, come back and restart it. So they might actually be getting a slightly better experience. Really, if there was any underlying pedagogy for Coursera and edX, that was the essence of the lecture and extending the lecture worldwide. But what kind of methods get better with scale so that the more people who take part, the better it gets? Well, when I was at Nottingham University, one of the things we did was to try and think about all the different types of learning. And here are the ones that we came up with. It may not be exhaustive. You may be able to think of a few more, but it's pretty comprehensive. And I'm not going to go through them all. But here are the list of different methods of teaching and learning, all of which can be done with technology as well. So whether it's delivered learning, which is like lectures, learning through assessing, case-based learning, inquiry-driven learning. So again, which of these would get better as you scale them up? The answer is only a few of them. So those ones, learning through construction, through conversation, and through networking. And let me give you examples of those. So construction, if you think of Minecraft. So I'm sure most of you will have heard of Minecraft or come across Minecraft. One of the reasons it works is that it gets better with scale. You've got a world that learners can create, that young people can create. And the more people who take part, the better the creations, the better the world you can create. Similarly with networking. I mean, it's one of the pedagogies that has come in through computer technology, the ability to learn through connecting people together on networks. And that was the basis for the very earliest MOOCs, called CMOOCs, the idea of connectivism. But also conversation, that the more people who take part in a conversation, the better that conversation is, because they bring different perspectives, different knowledge, different backgrounds. And so we decided to base FutureLearn on a theory of learning as conversation. And it goes back to an educational technologist called Gordon Pask, and also more recently Diana Laurillard, who for a time was the government's e-learning manager. And she was also Pro-Vice Chancellor at the Open University and now at UCL in London. And it's a notion of learning as conversation. It comes from a background in educational theory based on cybernetics. Cybernetics is the theory of interaction and the theory of control and mutual interaction. And the idea is this: all human learning involves conversation. We converse with ourselves when we reflect on our own experiences, when we experience the world and then sit back and say, what is it that we're looking at? What is it that we're trying to do? So we have internal mental conversations to try and make distinctions and to try and understand our interaction with the world. We converse with teachers to understand their expert knowledge. And we converse with other learners to try and reach shared understanding, to say, this is my view, and then speak to you. Okay, I hear your view. Well, let's try and reach some mutual understanding. And the way in which you do that is through conversation. But it's grounded conversation. You also have to then understand each other's goals, and you have to develop a shared, a mutual language in order to do that conversation. So I say it came from cybernetics. Cybernetics is the idea of feedback and control. So at the lowest level, you would have conversations about what it is that you are doing. Imagine two learners engaged in doing an experiment. So what they would be doing would be they would be testing out something. They would be running that experiment. And they would be experiencing what they were doing, finding what worked, finding what didn't. And then they would then together talk about how you could control that, how you could change it, how you could make it better, and then put that into effect. Test it, experience it, and it's a productive cycle. And there is a language, there is a conversation about what it is that you are doing. But there's also a higher level conversation, not just about what it is that you are doing, but also about why it is that you are doing it. Why am I doing this experiment? What am I trying to achieve? What's the purpose of it? So there is a more reflective conversation. And for your students, you want them to have both. You want them to converse about the activity that they are taking part in, but also at the higher level, you want them to converse about why they're carrying out that activity, what it is that they're trying to achieve. And so you have a higher level conversation of reflecting, of understanding, and of planning that controls the lower level activity. And each of those is a feedback loop. Each of those, if it works, is an engine for learning. So here's a more abstract way of putting it. So you have conversations at two different levels. You have conversations at the level of actions about what it is that you are trying to do. And that conversation needs to be grounded in something. So you need to have some shared medium. It might be a simulation or an experiment that you're doing. It might be a shared video, a shared piece of text. So you have a conversation about something. And you have a conversation with a partner. That partner could be a teacher, or it could be another learner. And then at the higher level, you also have conversations about why it is that you are doing it. And to have those conversations at the higher level, each person needs to reflect on what they're doing. So you have those reflective conversations, within yourself, and then the conversations at the higher level. And you need to have a medium for doing that. So that, if you like, is a conversational model. Each of those lines indicates a type of conversation that you have. Now, why is this interesting to FutureLearn? Well, I showed to the design team, the software designers, a number of different models of education. So Vygotsky's model of social constructivist, social cultural learning, Dewey's inquiry-based learning. I showed them a number of different models of learning. But this was the first one that they really got as software designers. They said, okay, we understand it. What we've got to do is to implement each of these different sorts of conversation. And okay, let's see what's the shared medium, how do we implement that, how do we implement the sorts of conversations that learners have, how do we implement those reflective conversations. It was an implementable model. And that's not surprising because Gordon Pask himself was an educational technologist who designed, in fact, he designed the first commercial adaptive and personalized teaching system in the 1960s. So that was the basis for designing the FutureLearn platform. Now, I just want to say a little bit about how that has worked. And I want to give you an example of one course. It was a course from the British Council called Understanding IELTS, and it was preparing people for the international IELTS exam. It's the largest ever course online. So it still holds the record for the largest ever MOOC course, with 420,000 people were registered, 270,000 people started that course. It was in June 2015. From 190 countries, and for many, it was their first time learning online. 25% of them learned on mobile devices. So just want to give that course as an illustration. So firstly, the sorts of conversations at the level of actions. So the way we designed the platform was that instead of sending learners off to a separate forum, we linked the conversations directly with the teaching material. So this is the first video on the course called Exams and Me, and if you click on it, you get the conversation alongside the video. So it says, "You like his accent." And then one of the students says, "I've just created a group on Facebook to help learning," and puts up there the Facebook link. So that's learners who are not just conversing with each other, but also offering support to each other. And each video, each piece of content is linked with that sort of conversation at the level of action, conversation for doing something. But also, there are conversations at the level of description, at that higher level, reflective conversations. So FutureLearn is organized around steps, kind of educational Lego bricks. And we have steps that are video steps, steps that are text steps, but also discussion steps. And those discussion steps are where you can have a different sort of conversation, where you can reflect on the learning that you've done during that week, and you can discuss it at a higher level with other learners. And those are very carefully designed to enable, to elicit those sorts of reflective discussions. So, for example, what sort of advice would you give to somebody who was taking an exam? And then you use your own experience to have that more reflective conversation. We also have study groups where students in smaller groups can get together to talk about more goal-oriented and task-oriented activities. And at any point, you can join a study group and discuss with a group of other students. I just showed you that first video at the beginning, and you can just see there to the right what you click on. It shows 57,029 comments. When we first designed FutureLearn, we thought there might be a bit of discussion on each step. There might be 10 or 20 comments. We had no idea that there might be that scale of response. 57,000 comments. And in some ways, we've been a victim of our own success, because then how do you manage that scale of conversation? And we've had then students saying, but I can't read 50,000 comments. The aim and the way we designed it was rather like a sort of water cooler conversation, or a conversation you might have over coffee in a conference, where you walk up to somebody, you have the conversation, you go away, so you participate in a conversation at a time. But there were some students, quite naturally on the course, who felt they had to read every piece of teaching material, and they just couldn't read 57,000 comments. So we then had to look at ways of managing that. Firstly, telling students not to worry. It's not necessary to read all 57,000 comments, but also to bring in techniques from social media to manage that scale of conversation. So on the left, you can see filtering. So you can filter the conversations in a number of ways. For instance, by most liked. You can filter conversations by people that you follow. Second decision we made was to make everything open. So instead of having pseudonyms and avatars, you use people's real names and encourage people to add their profiles, so that when you made a posting, you owned it. Another decision we made was that all of the conversations were published under a Creative Commons license. So every posting that a learner makes is a publication under a Creative Commons license. And it means that learners, if you like, have the same status as experts. They publish their work. It makes for some interesting issues to do with research, because if we use any of those comments, we have to acknowledge the learner as the author of their own work. So we can't anonymize the comments. We have to acknowledge the learner as the author of their own work. So we have openness. We have moderating. So there is a professional moderating company, and it's reactive moderation, so anybody can flag a comment. It goes to that moderating company that checks it and will remove that if it's in any way abusive. And also roles. So we've started off with giving educator roles and then facilitator roles, and we've now just introduced peer facilitators. So these are people who have shown particular success or effectiveness on other courses, and we've got two sorts of facilitators. Ones who have been generally useful on other courses, who have made constructive comments on a variety of courses, who have been followed, who have been well liked. And other ones, specialist facilitators, people who've been on previous runs of a course and have shown specialist knowledge. We then contact them, we provide them with training, and they act as peer facilitators. And they're really pleased to do that. They don't get paid for it, but we have a good set of volunteers to do that because it looks good on your CV if you're facilitating a course for 10,000 or 20,000 people. So we now have peer facilitators on FutureLearn. And that there shows the facilitation dashboard. So as you can imagine, because we get massive scale participation, we also get massive scale data. And we do a lot of analytics and a lot of opportunity for analytics, but also for social analytics, for trying to understand those social interactions and those conversational interactions. A typical course may have 500,000 postings, 500,000 comments. And so it's a huge opportunity then to do analysis of social interaction and of conversation. And so we provide dashboards. We also provide each partner, each university, with a dump, a database full of all the information about the courses, including all of the comments and replies. And you can also see there, for instance, the top influencers, the most prolific commenters, and we use those for supporting the peer facilitation. So does it work? So you may say, okay, it's a brave experiment, but has it actually worked in practice? I'm just going to show you a chart there. We tried as best we could to do a comparison of different MOOC platforms. using published data. So we obviously had access to all of the FutureLearn data, and that's showing it there up to the end of 2015, when we had some comparative published data from Coursera and from edX, and also from Edinburgh University that runs courses on FutureLearn and on Coursera. What we found was this, and you can see the number of people registered on courses. In general, at that time, FutureLearn was somewhat lower. It was before we had a lot of the British Council courses. The percentage of people who are registered, who visit the course, pretty much the same for all of the platforms. So about half of the people who register for a course actually start the course. Active learners, so learners who start, who actually engage with the course material, who read one or more of the course elements. Again, pretty much the same across the different platforms. But the big difference is in the social engagement. So on the other platforms, it's about 10%. On FutureLearn, it's about 35% of people who engage actively, posting one or more comments or replies. So in that sense, it has worked. We've got much larger scale participation. And of course, many more of those learners learn from other people's conversations, from reading those other conversations. In terms of completion, FutureLearn does better, or at least as well as other platforms. 17% is the average completion rate. Interestingly, we did a survey of people who dropped out of FutureLearn courses, because I know those of you who are engaged in MOOCs, completion rates, retention is always an issue. So we had the opportunity to survey people who had dropped out of FutureLearn courses and to ask them, why did you drop out? And 95% of the people who were interviewed said, life got in the way. It's not you, it's me. And some really harrowing stories of people who had to go back into hospital for cancer treatment, people whose parents had died, all of those things of life getting in the way. Of the 5%, about half of that 5% said the course was a little too difficult for them or a little too easy for them. And only about 1% said they didn't like the platform. So that was the reason that people drop out of courses. But also, I say, because we have all of that data, we also have the ability to be able to analyze it, and particularly to analyze the structure of conversations. And that's something that a huge opportunity and quite unusual. So I've got a PhD student now who is looking at patterns of conversation. So she's doing analysis of patterns of conversation. And there are different sorts of conversations. So if you look at a typical conversation on FutureLearn there, you would see an initiating post, a first reply from learner A, a first reply from learner B, then the initiator replying, learner A's further reply. So there are different sorts, there are different types of posting. So she looked at those different sorts of patterns of posting and categorized them into 7 different groups of social learners. So learners are people who never receive replies. Repliers are people who only reply to others. Then there are initiators who respond under their own posts, active social learners who initiate posts, reply to others, and engage in repeated turn-taking, active social learners without repeated turn-taking, and reluctant active social learners who create lone posts and reply to others. So she did a pretty comprehensive analysis. And by far the biggest category were those active social learners. So the people who do take part in conversations on FutureLearn are then active. They then tend to post and respond to other people's posts. And that's a nice quote from one learner. Again, as I say, we always acknowledge our learners. So from Karen Carmichael Timpson, a learner on the ecosystems course, it's almost as if the basic course is in 2D, but the postings lift it to 3D and really make it come alive. So it's another dimension of learning through interacting with other people's postings. And just to finish off, that I mentioned that we now have gone on a journey from MOOCs towards programs of courses, and then towards putting master's level degree courses with accreditation on FutureLearn. I just want to leave you with a quote from a senior member of Deakin University, who was our first university that ran a master's degree on FutureLearn. Beverly Oliver, who said, "In a troubled world where borders seem to be closing, we need more learners engaging with peers around the world." Thank you.